This is one of those rare occasions when the history of an art form and the history of an artist converge on our stage. In a directing and writing career that has profoundly influenced filmgoers and film itself, he has given us an astonishing array of work, from Mean Streets, which received a Writers Guild nomination for its screenplay, to Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, for which he received British Academy Award and Cannes Film Festival Golden Palm nominations, Taxi Driver, for which he received a British Academy Award nomination and won the National Film Critics Society Award and the Golden Palm. New York, New York, Raging Bull, for which he received Golden Globe and Oscar nominations and won the National Film Critics Society Award. The King of Comedy, for which he received British Academy Award and Golden Palm nominations. After Hours, for which he received a Cannes Film Festival Best Director nomination and won the Golden Palm for Best Picture. The Color of Money, The Last Temptation of Christ, for which he received an Oscar nomination. Goodfellas, which received César, Golden Globe, and Oscar nominations, and won Los Angeles, New York, Boston, National Film Critics, Venice Film Festival, and British Academy Awards for both direction and best film. Cape Fear, which was nominated for the Berlin Film Festival Golden Bear. The Age of Innocence, for which he received Golden Globe and Oscar nominations, and won the National Board of Review Best Director Award. Casino, for which he received a Golden Globe nomination. Kundun, Bringing Out the Dead, and Gangs of New York. For all of the above and much more, the Actors Studio is proud to welcome Martin Scorsese.
What a welcome. Okay.
Our students are interested in the geography of the life that shaped the artist in that chair. For some of our guests, their earliest experiences are of minor consequences, but for others, they are immeasurably important. I suspect that you belong perhaps preeminently in the latter group. Let us start with this. What is your father's name?
In American, it was Charles, but his actual name, Sicilian, was Luciano.
John. In many of your films, families and family roots are significant. Where did your father's family come from?
My father's family came from a small village outside of Palermo called Polizzi Generosa.
And what is your mother's name?
My mother's Catherine, Catherine Kappa.
And where did her family come from?
A small village, a small city village, I guess you'd call it, outside of Palermo, again, at the south. It's in a valley. Polizzi is in the mountains, and this place called Cimina is in the valley, and you could see it in Visconti's great film, The Leopard.
Where were you born, Marty?
My mother and father got married in 1933, and they were born on Elizabeth Street. They moved to Sunnyside, Queens. My brother was born, and then they moved to, it was very, very nice at the time, apparently, and moved to Corona, Queens, and I was born in Flushing Hospital. We stayed there for about 7 years, but my father got in trouble with the landlord, and we had to move out, and we moved back to Elizabeth Street and shared the rooms with my grandparents.
You were in what is called by the public Little Italy, weren't you, when you came back?
Yes.
What's Little Italy like? What's it like growing up on Elizabeth Street or in Little Italy?
Well, I think the Little Italy of 1949, 1950, where I was sort of catapulted into, because in Queens, there was a tree. You know what I'm saying? There was a tree. It was fantastic. It was like there was grass. People that, I mean, there were, you know, but it had a nice, it was nice. It had leaves, and you know, I'm telling you, when we moved back, and we had to, and there was a big problem with the landlord. There was all kinds of complications. We moved back to Elizabeth Street, and I looked out that window, and that would be my point of view for years from that window, the third floor front.
You shot out of it.
Yeah, I shot out of that window precisely from my grandmother's apartment. At a certain point in time, I really thought this was the best place in the world. It was 3 or 4 butcher shops, a funeral parlor on that same street, 4 greengrocers, candy stores, pork store around the corner, a fish market. And that was just Elizabeth between Houston and Prince.
Mary the butcher?
Mary the butcher, she passed away only a few weeks ago.
No.
She was 96, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You've talked about it as a kind of village. Obviously, it shaped you, right?
Yes.
Shapes you still, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, yeah.
I know very few people who have been in that chair who seem to have been shaped as much by those early experiences.
Well, I think what happened was that having contracted asthma when I was 2 or 3 years old, and corona, something to do with taking my tonsils out. It wasn't necessary, and something happened. And next thing I know, I had asthma, and I was separated from everyone else. And I think what started connecting me to the family was the fact that they really didn't know what to do with me. And I couldn't do any sports, and I couldn't play with the other kids, so they took me to the movies. And I think I experienced a great deal of emotional and a very strong emotional connection, particularly between my father and myself.
Was it he who took you to the movies?
Yeah, my mother took. Yeah, he took me, and my brother took me, but my father was the one who took me to see some very classic films.
Was that at the Academy of Music?
Academy of Music and the Loews Commodore, which is now NYU School of the Arts.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It really is.
And what films had the greatest influence on you?
Well, I think when my parents took me to see the first film I can remember seeing by title was Duel in the Sun.
Yeah.
And I must have been 4 years old or 5 years old. My mother took me to see it because I liked westerns, and but I think she didn't like westerns. It was condemned by the church.
Yeah.
So she said, "I'm taking the kid. It's a western." And and I must say it affected me very strongly. I think the hysteria of the film affected me. The kind of eroticism and the 3-strip Technicolor was so vivid. I remember hiding under the seat at the end at the Duel in the Sun itself. I was so frightened by the images of the sun and by the two of these people who were so madly in love that they were about to kill each other, and they do. But also in 1948, my father got a television set in Corona, 16-inch black and white RCA Victor, and on Friday nights they would show Italian films, and they showed neorealist films for the Italian-American community, one a week. Bicycle Thief. The first one I saw was Paisan. And my grandparents came over to the house. They were there, and they were speaking a language that the people on the TV was speaking, and I couldn't quite make that Italy was one place and America was another, but I knew that there was some connection. But I know that I was greatly drawn to those pictures. Paisan, Open City, and Bicycle Thief, and Shoeshine were the key ones. That became part of my very soul and consciousness.
Were you a solitary kid?
Oh, yes. I was pretty much the outsider all my life. I was sort of pushed. I mean, I would love to have. I think I would have liked to play stickball. I don't know. I could never. I tried a few times. I was there for comic relief. I mean, they tried. I was so bad at it.
Because of the asthma, was it?
The asthma, basically, and I think what was put into my head because my parents were, decent, hardworking, working-class people, but they were not educated that way, and then they got very frightened and just said you can't do anything, and you can't fight, you can't play, you can't laugh. So the thing about it was that I think what happened was I had to find other ways of defending myself in areas that were kind of rough, and so I sort of had to rely on what was left of my wits.
Did you have a nickname?
Oh, Marty Pills, yes. I had my drugstore with me. Or you just, go, time to take your pill, time to take this pill, time. Oh, it was, and to this, to a very long period of time, into my 50s, really. I'm still in my, 59, so.
How did you respond to those movies that you saw? Is it true that you began to mimic them by drawing?
Oh, yeah. What I wanted to do was make them. And
At what age, Marty?
Well, I started when I was 7 years old. I got the idea from the Little King comic strips because they were panels,
Sure.
and you could have actual scenes. And I said, I didn't understand motion yet, and that you could cut from one to the other. And that when you cut, there's a certain, it's interesting, if you cut a shot, that's why I still love editing, you cut one shot and there's camera movement and that sort of thing, and it cuts to another shot. It creates a third shot that's in your mind.
Yes.
That's not there. It creates information. Usually it's not there. You see, it's very subjective too, And that's what's the magic. That's what's so magical about it. So I started drawing that, and then in 1950, my father took me to see a film called The Magic Box. And it was a film made for the 50th anniversary of British cinema. And Robert Donat played the inventor of cinema in England. It was still to this day contested, William Freeze Green. And in that film, he shows Maria Schell at one point what he calls what is known as the persistence of vision, that you could draw little figures on the edge of a book, and if you move in each drawing, you move an arm just a little bit more, and you flip them, it looks as if they're moving. So I started to do that on all the telephone books and that sort of thing. And eventually, when I was about 12 or 13, the panels weren't big enough. They were widescreen Roman epics and that sort of thing. And
you were storyboarding.
Storyboarding, yes. Then it became storyboarding. Then I knew that you can boom the camera down, over the Roman legions entering on the Appian Way. And it's from above, and then as they come this way, it comes down over them, and you go into the gates with them, into the city, and that sort of thing. And but the trick there is, what do you storyboard of that shot? You have to do 3 pieces: the beginning, the middle, and the end of it.
Yeah.
So that was the whole. And how do you frame a close-up in widescreen? Which I still can't do.
Neither can anybody else. You mentioned that going to the movies was an erotic experience for you. I want to know if this is true. Is it true that you were very possessed with Wendy and Peter?
Yes.
You were.
Wendy, it's a little tricky in that Disney film, I'm telling you. There's one, she was, first of all, Tinkerbell was Marilyn Monroe. She was patterned in the Disney film I'm talking about. That was Monroe at the time. Really, it was patterned after her. Mm-hmm. But Wendy, at one point, she has to step over on a rock or something, and her dress goes up, and the leg and the knee and the ankle, that was it.
126 guests, and you're the first one who has been plunged into pubescence by Walt Disney.
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. I think it's quite touching. Both Gabriel Byrne and Pierce Brosnan in that chair have spoken of the influence on them of the Catholic Church. We all know how important it is to you. Were you an altar boy?
Yes, I was. There was a young Italian-American priest who came to our parish.
Is that Principe?
Brother Principe, yeah. It was his first assignment. And he became a rather strong influence on all of us, all the guys down there, all the kids. I think he was about 22 years old, 23. He was very young, as I say, and he had a whole other way of thinking about the world and made us understand that there was something outside of the neighborhood. A different way of looking at life, possibly, number one. And also there was literature, there were certain kinds of cinema. He would talk about the cliches of movies that we liked and made us think of other ways.
He did?
Yeah, yeah.
Was he one of the reasons that you thought of entering the priesthood?
It was the main reason for it, I think. But I think the real religious person, the real person who's acting out, is in the street, working with people.
Yes.
Whether they're EMS workers or, they don't have to be priests and nuns. They're doing God's work. That's what I think.
Yes.
And so I think what I had to learn was that, and I learned it quickly in a preparatory seminary, that I wasn't ready for it.
How old were you when you went into the seminary?
I was about 14 or 15.
How long were you there?
About a year and a half. I was asked to leave. Got very mad at I brought my father up there and said, this boy, I'll never forget the Monsignor, boy, they were tough. He said, this boy, you tell this kid one thing, you tell this kid, see that brick wall? Don't go knock your head against it. Don't do it, it's going to hurt. He gets up and he does it. My father just sat there and, that was it. That was it.
How did you continue your education once you realized you weren't going to wear the collar?
Cardinal Hayes High School. I took the last 3 years of high school there, and by the 4th year, I was sort of split between still thinking of the priesthood and becoming fascinated, totally obsessed with film. And I was beginning to see other foreign films. I was just consumed by this extraordinary input of other cultures. And I was just enriching everything. And then I'll never forget seeing Bergman during the time I was in high school, seeing The Seventh Seal.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that was quite something. And so, but by the 4th year of high school, I was able to straighten myself out, so to speak, feel a little better about myself, and tried to get into Fordham and the other universities that my friends were going to, but I was in the lower quarter of my graduating class. And so I couldn't go to any of those universities. And looking around, there were a number of places, but New York University had, at that time, a TMR department, television, motion pictures, and radio. Mm-hmm. Television, motion picture, radio history was a history of cinema, etc. And it was given once a week by Haig Manoogian. And basically, a lot of kids took that class because they thought they could hang around for 2 or 3 hours on Thursday and relax and watch
Yeah,
movies.
yeah.
No, no, no. So by the second semester, that was pretty strong, and it was kind of weeded out. And then in the second year, you took 2 other courses, and by the third year, you were able to begin to make a short film.
Manoogian obviously was a great influence on you, wasn't he?
Yes.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
Now look how quickly we come in this life to movies, to real movies.
Yeah.
What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this?
Well, that title was just a reference to movie cliches. That was just a desire to put something on film that had an energy and a humor to it that really came. The humor came through early television, I think, and had to do more with Ernie Kovacs. And
A god.
Yeah. It came from skit comedy, really, and it employed. It was really a sense like an exercise. I tried to do the film in terms of every camera trick imaginable, which came from cartoons and also from the French New Wave and the Italian New Wave films that were happening at the time.
It's not just you, Murray.
That was an attempt a year later at taking something that I kind of knew in a way, the area I grew up in and people in that area, but I also combined it with movies from Hollywood, particularly Warner Brothers. The gritty films they made in the 30s.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a Fugitive from Chain Gang, but mainly Raoul Walsh's pictures, the Roaring Twenties.
Didn't your mother appear in it?
Oh, my mother's in it, yeah, serving. Well, we just drafted those. We drafted my mother into the picture. My father, too. We drafted them all. We actually shot some of it in my grandmother's apartment.
Our students here are earning their master's degrees at New School University, and I know that you continued your education at NYU, did you not, toward a master's degree?
Yes, actually, Haig Manoogian, they went into a master class in a way, and it was only about 4 or 5 students. And I started to work on what I wanted to. I wanted to do a feature. The only thing is, I didn't know how to. If I had anything to say, number one, and if I had it to say, how could I transform it into film and image and dialogue, etc. And it took me 3 or 4 years to be able to do that.
This evolved over a period of time, I think, the film Who's That Knocking at My Door?
It certainly did.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
What did you shoot it on?
Well, my friend Richard Cole at the time, young film student who was really wonderful with camera, we got talked into doing, this would have been the first 35 millimeter film at NYU.
Right.
And the only thing was I was used to moving, you know, what the French New Wave and the Italian New Wave had, and what John Cassavetes, when Shirley Clark was shooting with, I mean, after she did Connection, it was the Arriflex.
Yeah.
You know, or the Eclair. And you were moving the camera. It was kind of handheld, but you don't have to do it handheld. You can put it on an Elemax Spider. You can move it. You can have 42 different compositions in an 8-minute shot, you know, if you moved it correctly or as you liked. And so what happened was that we got, in the first couple of months of shooting that particular film, we used the wrong equipment. It was a Mitchell BNC.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I brought it down to...
booth.
Yeah, literally. It's bigger than this platform.
Yeah.
And I brought it down to the old neighborhood. And I got this little storefront that was supposed to be an after-hours place. And the camera was bigger than the place inside. And it was killing the actors. It was killing the whole feeling of the picture. And ultimately, we just... I edited together what I had at the end of the year. It was 1965. And it was shown at the NYU end of the year screening. It was a disaster. And it sort of lay dormant for about a year or two until Haig Manoogian came up and said, listen, why don't we shoot the scenes that you should have done, certain scenes between what turned out to be Zina Bethune and Harvey Keitel, explaining some of that, intercutting it with the 35, and ultimately that was the film that was shown at Chicago Film Festival.
Zina Bethune and I acted together on The Guiding Light.
Aha.
The film has some eroticism in it. There's some nudity, there's some sex.
Oh, yes, that's a very important point. We showed the picture in Chicago. I didn't go. Haig went and they showed it. Haig called up and said, listen, we have a guy who wants to distribute the film, finally. The only thing is, and this you have to understand, was that there was a new freedom in cinema in '68.
In everything.
In everything, yeah. And so Haig said, listen, we want the picture released. It has to have a nude scene. I flew Harvey over to Amsterdam, and I shot this scene in Amsterdam.
No kidding.
Found a loft, looked just like the Bowery. Yeah. And so we came back. I brought it in. I didn't declare it at customs. I just had it in my coat. And it was cut to the end by the doors. And Took it in, we looked at it, it was pretty good. We said, okay, fine. I had done the storyboards and everything. And Haig said, where do we put it? I said, I don't know. So we just dropped in the middle of one scene. That was the kind of, there was no structure, there was no narrative.
It was sort of his fantasy.
Yeah, it was a fantasy
Yeah.
thing, and it was pretty, it's not my favorite but it's the film. But it really, Who's That Knocking was really a learning process. You have to understand, too, that a student film at that time, it isn't like where you have a schedule. You shot when you had the camera. So I'd have to call Harvey and say, we're shooting on the weekend. He says, and Harvey was a court stenographer. He was trying to earn a living.
Yeah.
He really got mad after a while, and he got his hair cut. I said, why did you cut your hair? The scene is a continuity. He said, I can't, I have a life. You guys are crazy. You keep shooting this thing on the weekends. And the only thing was the haircut. He went in one scene. It's the same scene. He goes in one door, and he comes in, his hair's cut. Goes to show you what a great storyteller. Nobody noticed.
How did you come upon Boxcar Bertha?
Well, what happened was I came back from Europe, and I worked for a little while at NYU as an instructor.
Yeah.
I used to work for the Maisel brothers, and I used to hold, when they started doing color, I had to hold a light for them, because they were doing cinema verite,
Yeah.
And I was editing some documentaries with him, and with Thelma Schoonmaker, too, is when I met her there. And
Yeah.
what eventually happened was that we were going to do a rock and roll revival film. Something else came ahead of it. And he said, why don't we just go up and test this theory, and shoot this thing called Woodstock that's happening. I was like an assistant director in a way, and then did some of the editing on that film. And that got me known by certain people at Warner Brothers, and I was taken out to Warner Brothers in 1970. And while I was out there for those first 4 weeks, one of my agents, William Morris at the time, took me over to see Roger Corman. He said, would you be interested in doing sort of a sequel to Bloody Mama? I said, yeah, costumes, and yeah, the 1930s I would be. Yeah. It was called Boxcar Bertha, and we had Barbara Hershey, David Carradine, and Barry Primus. Those are the people I had to make it with. I became rather obsessive with based on those old storyboards I did when I was a kid. I decided that on seeing these Russian films that I liked very much, and the Italian and the French films, and I was designing the shot. So the cheaper the film, the less money I had to make the film, the better prepared I had to be. That's what I felt. And I just designed, I drew 500 shots and showed it to him. He said, can I see your notes? And I looked at it, he went through it, he looked at the 10, 20 pages, he goes, that's enough, you'll be fine.
And didn't Corman have his certain obligatory requirements also about
Well,
violence and nudity?
Yeah, I mean, we loved Roger Corman films. I love the horror films, particularly the Poe films. And so when he was there, when I read the script and I did some work on the script, he liked that. And he said, now, Marty, what you have to understand is every 15 pages, there has to be nudity or the suggestion thereof. Suggestion.
I believe that Who's That Knocking at My Door was the second of a trilogy that began with Jerusalem, Jerusalem at NYU and concluded with a rather important film, not only for you, but for a great many films that followed it. And it was called Mean Streets.
Yeah.
What was its evolution?
Well, I think what was happening was in the 4 years that I was pulling together Who's That Knocking, don't forget, there's part of you, too, that one has to balance out wanting to express yourself with cinema and be alive in telling stories with camera and actors, but also balance it with the need to be famous. There was that, when I saw Bertolucci at that time, I wanted that, but I had to go my own way, and the work has to be more important than being famous or being known. And over a period of years, I had to learn that. But the problem was that at that time, I was just possessed with it, and I went too hard and too fast. And never forget the New York Film Festival has always been great to me. When we submitted Who's That Knocking, they wrote back a note saying, "You're living aesthetically beyond your means." So, I mean, you really had a lot to learn about life and people. I was burning, but I didn't have. And so, out of that, and also the incredible knowledge I learned from Corman, and that Corman was another university, combining that with what I couldn't get on film in Who's That Knocking, what I wanted to say, and this, what was really eating away at me, my life, my memories and my emotional makeup, which had to do more with my family and my father and his family as his brothers, was eventually to find its way into Mean Streets, and it was also about myself and my old friends. covering a period from 60 to 63 when I was sort of split between NYU and reading Henry James and hanging out in after-hour clubs on the weekend.
Yeah.
You know.
How long did it take you to write it?
6 years, on and off. My friend Martic Martin helped me a lot. He was an NYU student, and he would help work on the structure and that sort of thing.
For whom did you write the role of Charlie?
Harvey. He was the alter ego, there's no doubt about it. We became very close, and he's quite extraordinary, Harvey.
In other words, you were writing about yourself, so it was autobiographical.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, I didn't think it would get made. Then I thought when it was getting made that it would never be really released. I just thought if anybody would ever want to know what it was really like with Sicilian Americans downtown, 40 years in the future, they could look at 2 or 3 scenes, one of them being the improvisation between De Niro and Keitel in the back room earlier in the film. They could get a sense of what it really is, because De Niro knew those people. Harvey would hang around with me, so he knew a lot of the people we were making the film about. And so that became something I thought that would just be eventually shown almost anthropologically. I never really thought it was going to be, you know.
You were wrong.
Yeah.
As the movie begins, we hear a voice in darkness. Whose voice is it?
That's my voice. And
do you remember what you said?
Yeah, is you make up for your sins at home and in the streets, I think. Is it?
Yeah, he says, you don't make up for your sins in church.
Yeah.
Do it in the streets, you do it at home. All the rest is BS, and
yeah,
you know it.
And you know it.
In one of the most memorable shots in the film, Charlie holds his hand over a votive candle. Yeah. Have you ever done that?
Well, yeah, and in certain, it's kind of a funny thing, but out of context, it sounds somewhat horrendous. But within context, because you had a balance of certain kinds of teachers and certain priests or nuns who came in to speak specially, and there were some who would give what they would call a mission. And then by the 3rd day, the sermons got really serious, and you got into hellfire to a certain extent, and you put your finger over a flame and see how long you can hold it there. So imagine the pains of hell.
When Harvey was here, this is what he said.
The dogma of the different religions, in my sense the Jewish one, his sense the Catholic one, the prohibitions, the hopes, the taboos. We had these questions, we were struggling against these very restrictive emotional criteria. We felt something else was present, something else was there we needed to get at. And we've been trying ever since.
Agree with him?
Yeah, no, I tell myself we go right to the heart of it. I mean, it's just simply like being the same person at times.
One of your hallmarks is certainly the color palette that you choose. It was evident very early in Mean Streets. The bar scenes are all in red.
Yeah.
They're red. Another of your hallmarks is the use of slow motion, certainly visible in this movie. What does slow motion do for you? What is it meant to do to us?
I think for me at that time, there was something about the deliberately slowing down of everyday actions, and also the aesthetic of slow motion, the movement, watching the movements, and
graceful,
like dance.
It is a dance, and also it makes us think in slow motion. Who plays the assassin at the end of the film?
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Why?
I had to do it out of economy, and also it was my 30th birthday that night. I said,
you gave yourself a part?
I gave myself a part to shoot those aspects of myself, which I was trying to get through, which I was trying to absorb and get past, you know, but it didn't work.
Worked in the film, you were a very good assassin.
Oh, thanks.
Marty, of course, around the world is considered an auteur, and one of the reasons, of course, is that there are so many hallmarks in his films that are distinguishable from anybody else's. One of them, of course, is the way you use music. Now, you were using it that way in this film. You were using period rock and roll.
Yes.
You're accenting with songs.
Absolutely, and the songs were all pretty much planned way beforehand. For example, when Keitel wakes up from that nightmare in the beginning, he wakes up and he goes to look in the mirror, which is something out of really, I love Albert Finney in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, looking in the mirror. Remember? And he has his voiceover, said, "What am I?" And it's so beautiful. And he touches his face, and then he goes to lie back down on the bed, and his head, it cuts in 3 cuts very close to the pillow as his head hits, and those are the first 3 beats of Be My Baby by the Ronettes, Phil Spector sound. And that's all all planned. That's all planned out.
And then do you edit in the room to the music when you get into the editing?
Yeah.
When Ellen Burstyn was here, we talked about Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I believe that Ellen was responsible for you
Oh, yes.
directing that film. How did it happen?
Well, she was looking, she had just done The Exorcist, and Warner Brothers was very high on her. She was excellent in the film. Then Francis Coppola had just seen Mean Streets, and he told her, you got to see this kid.
I'm told that when Ellen met with you, she said, what do you know about women?
I said, absolutely nothing, but I'd hope to learn.
Ellen Burstyn won an Oscar for her performance in this film. She was one of the creators of this school.
Mm-hmm.
She's taught our students here. She was one of the first guests in that chair, and she is today a co-president of the Actors Studio with Harvey Keitel and Al Pacino. I think that in that film, her range is astonishing.
Oh, yeah. We had a great time with that because she's really tough, fearless, and was open to anything with a great sense of humor.
She said, of all the directors I've worked with, Marty is best at providing the environment where actors can do their best work. He'll say, okay, we know what the scene is about, now what's it going to be? And the actors will start improvising. Do you like to use improvisation a great deal?
Yes. In Alice, we did a great deal of it, and it was really influenced from Cassavetes after seeing Shadows and being around John Cassavetes a lot. I was really influenced by his life that he put on screen, but also in certain moments of American movies that Hawks created, and also John Ford created a certain camaraderie with the family in John Ford films.
And there's a little girl in the film who plays the friend of Ellen's son. Who is
Jodie
that?
Foster. Jesus. Jodie Foster. When she came in the room for the audition, sat down, I said, where you been? She said, I've been working on some commercials. I said, oh, yeah? Yeah. So this kid is tough.
Ellen won the Academy Award for this picture. Who accepted her Academy Award?
She asked me to accept it that night. She was doing same time next year, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was sort of embarrassed. She asked me to thank myself. So I did.
With Marty's fifth professional effort, he quite simply created a landmark American movie. Tell us, please, what was the genesis of Taxi Driver?
In Los Angeles at the time, we became a group of people who started getting friendly. We all began to meet at different houses and places. And the man who took me around most of the time was Brian De Palma. Brian said, you have to meet this Paul Schrader. He's fantastic. Schrader's amazing, amazing. And he said, this is wonderful script. And he said, you should do it. You should do this, Taxi Driver. And I would sort of hang around Schrader, and he sort of give me a look like, yeah, come back when you know. Sort of like, get away from me. And I was tenacious. I was like a bull. I would go to every party. I'd go to, I was really a bore. And it was just impossible to be around. I just done a Roger Corman film. And I would be friendly with all of them, Michael and Julia Phillips, who later produced the picture. And as Julia Phillips, as she said, come back later when you've done something more than Boxcar Bertha and grow a few inches. But I came back. I kept coming back. And then one day we showed a rough cut of Mean Streets to Schrader, and he called up Phillipses, and they came. But it had to do also with the Phillipses being very strong, very powerful with the kind of films they wanted to make, films of vision in Hollywood at the time. The main thing was actually because De Niro would be in it, too. It was a team, in a way. And that's how we got the money for it.
I understand from Bob that you all cut your salaries to the bone in order to do it.
Oh, salary? No. I don't even remember a salary.
Really?
No, I mean, I'm sure they paid me something. But see, that was the thing. They always took advantage of me because I was so crazy to make these movies. And that's when Mike Ovitz finally came into the picture in 1986. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, you can get paid for this. Yeah? They're not going to take it away? He said, no, Marty, you can get paid. Sometimes.
The titles of this movie begin with a taxi emerging from a cloud of steam issuing from the bowels of New York. And the titles end with a long, extreme close-up of Travis's eyes, looking slowly right and left. Are you establishing the film's point of view at that point? Did you?
Yeah, that's a good point, because what I knew immediately, the film had to be, the only way it could be told was through his eyes and his perception only. That was the key thing. And so the eyes, which actually come from movement of eyes in Tales of Hoffman, of Robert Helpman, as playing the devil in Tales of, he would do these incredible things with his eyes, Yeah. So, I mean, they're long leaps, but those are the images that stay in your mind. You see, it reminds me of that, but if we do it at 36 frames, it might get this strange feeling the way Helpman had in Powell Pressburger's film, And then the other thing, too, is music was very important in that film, in that normally I couldn't conceive of music in the traditional Hollywood fashion. It had to be the music the way that I grew up around. But the only thing with Travis, the problem with Travis, that he was cut off from people. He didn't listen to the radio. So then I said, well, the only man who could do this score is Bernard Herrmann.
The best of them all, in my view.
Yeah.
So you had Hitchcock's composer?
Yeah. I called him up. He was living in London. I said, Mr. Herrmann? He said, yes. He said, I have this film I'd love you to try to do the music for. And he said, what's it about? It's called Taxi Driver. I don't do pictures of taxi drivers. I am not that kind of film. I said, no, but you should just read. I don't interested in that kind of thing. You kids today. You know, so. Anyway, we sent the script. I met him in London. I met him at a lunch, and he said, all right. He said, it was interesting. He said, he eats the cereal with peach brandy. He said, interesting character. And he said, it's all brass. The score is all brass, no strings. He said, it's all muscle, all strength. And he cued it. That was it. That was the picture.
To whom is the movie dedicated?
Well, to Bernard Herrmann, I believe the night that he finished the score. It was right the day before Christmas. He died at the Universal Sheraton Hotel.
You have made a sort of specialty of backseat roles. Having shot De Niro at the end of Mean Streets, why did you choose to play the murderous, cuckolded husband in the back of De Niro's cab in Taxi Driver?
It had been planned for a friend of mine who unfortunately got into a terrible accident, so I got in the back. But the thing about it was that De Niro, I learned probably pretty strong lesson in acting, and that I tell him, put the flag down. On the second take or third take, he had said, listen, make me put the flag down. And that did it. That opened up the whole thing.
But in the finished film, he does not put it down until you really get upset. He just sits there, looking at you.
That was the greatest lesson.
That's pure De Niro. Okay, here comes the stock company. Harvey was back.
Oh, yeah.
And where did you find that 12-year-old prostitute?
Oh, Jodie. Yeah, Jodie Foster.
Certainly one of the most famous scenes in the recent history of American cinema is Travis in front of the mirror. And when Bob was here, we talked about it, of course. And I happen to know that in the screenplay, that entire scene consists of the following parenthesis. Travis looks in the mirror. That's all.
That's it, yeah.
How much of it was improvised by De Niro? How much did you offer him?
Well,
or did you just turn him loose?
Well, there was a problem. We were over schedule. And I said, we've got to get this scene in front of the mirror. I just know that you should be talking, though, in the mirror. You should say something. I just don't know what you should say. I said, well, you got to just try a few things. I don't know. Okay. And so he just stumbled on his own, excuse me, are you talking to me thing? And he repeated and repeated and repeated. I said, keep going. Just kept saying, sounds good, keep going. And, you know, obviously I'm the only one here. All of that stuff came out of that. And then it was edited by, actually, Tom Rolfe, wonderful editor.
Beautiful.
Gave it to him. I said, I chose some takes. He looked at it. He said, give me a few minutes. Bang. He did it. I said, don't touch it.
Use a lot of overhead shots.
Yeah.
Why? You look worried. They're wonderful.
Well, first thing that comes to mind is Hitchcock. But I must say I have to go back to what I said earlier, and that is seeing a lot of life from the third floor front through the fire escape.
When he applies for the job, there's a shot from his point of view down on the table.
That's definitely the Lord, because he is the avenging angel. He's the one who's going to clean up everybody. He's going to set the world straight.
The film has a surprisingly gentle and idyllic ending. Sybil gets into the cab. He seems at peace.
I was a little nervous about it, but I did it, and it has a kind of, it's Schrader's thing. He really feels that way about it, and it works, I think. I added one thing, and the very, very end, where he looks in the mirror twice, and he focuses the mirror. And because I felt, in my mind, that a man like this, under the circumstances, crossing over the fantasy line and acting out.
Yeah.
I think he's going to do it again. I think it's just a matter of time.
So do I.
Yeah.
But for the moment, he's redeemed.
Yeah. Yeah.
How strongly do you believe in redemption in your films?
Well, that's a good question, because I think ultimately it has to do with, and I would have to be careful with this sort of thing, but it has to do with the emphasis on Christianity in my mind. My experience has been maybe the dark side of it. And yet I know there's supposed to be a light. There's supposed to be a redemption. There's supposed to be something that is uplifting, something that takes you out of yourself, and that I guess one would call a redemption. I don't know if I'm there. And that's what that Father Principe said when he saw a taxi driver. He said, well, I'm glad you ended it on Easter Sunday, not on Good Friday. And then ultimately told me there's too much Good Friday, not enough Easter Sunday in your films.
Really?
Yeah.
In 1976, Taxi Driver won the Golden Palm, the Cannes Film Festival. And 26 years later, at dinner on the closing night of the 2002 Cannes Film Festival, you and I made this date for tonight at the dinner.
Oh, that's right.
You have a long and important association with the Cannes Film Festival. You'd had a nomination for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. You won in '76.
Well, I was very surprised because I also thought that picture was a labor of love. It would never be shown.
God, what you felt when you saw The Seventh Seal, you just have to accept the fact that that's what many, many people have felt when they've seen Taxi Driver. With Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, Marty served notice that something young, vital, and important was happening in American film. But he altered the landscape forever with Raging Bull. How did that remarkable movie come into being?
Raging Bull came out of De Niro. Quite honestly, I didn't know any sports, so I wasn't interested in Raging Bull in that sense, in boxing. He kept at me on that picture for a number of years, actually, until finally I was in the hospital and De Niro came up to visit me, and he was in the bed, and he said, why don't you just, he said, listen, you'd be good for this film. Why don't you just do it? Come on. And I suddenly said yes. And I realized, you see, I kind of found myself in the character, in a way, in what he was interested in. And what Bob De Niro was interested in, myself suddenly came together in my head through this man named Jake LaMotta. And this profession, quote unquote, of fighting, which means a guy's job, he gets up, he goes and hits people, they hit him back. He comes home, it's the same thing. The ring, the bedroom, the kitchen, it's the same. And it just becomes all of life. And so I understood that. And with that, I came out of the hospital, I was in much better shape. And he said, we're going down to an island and work on the script together. And again, I'm not athletic. I don't like islands. I don't like trees and sand.
Sunshine?
Water. No. This guy took me down to this beautiful place in the island of St. Martin. And in the morning, we'd work on the scenes and different structure and dialogue and stuff. I'd put on audio tape. And then I'd write it up longhand. And the person would type it up, and at night we'd read it. 10 pages, maybe 8 pages a day. And it took about 2 weeks. And that was it. We came back with the script that basically didn't change.
I'm told by Bob that you had to schedule your film around his weight gain.
That was the key, yeah. That was the key. As he pointed out to me.
60 pounds.
Yeah, 60 pounds. We did the fight scenes first in Los Angeles. And then I decided that I don't want to do I don't want to do the thing from outside the ropes. The camera should be, again, like Travis, you should be in the person of the fighter himself. Therefore, you perceive the fight the way he perceives the fight. And what I decided to do was I storyboarded all the fight scenes based on a black and white video they did from one angle for me. And then we started shooting. We had scheduled 5 weeks for that in California. That took 10. And then we came back to New York to do about 10 weeks or 9 weeks of shooting of the dialogue scenes. And then we shot the last, the heavy Jake. We shot him in L.A. and San Pedro doubling for Florida in less than 10 days around Christmas time.
God. All of this consumed how much time altogether?
I don't know. We started, the whole thing altogether was 2 years, I think.
For me, one of the most interesting aspects of film is the way in which some directors and actors have become linked forever. Von Sternberg and Dietrich, William Wyler, Betty Davis, John Ford, John Wayne, Hitchcock and his Blonde Goddesses, Truffaut, Jean-Pierre Léaud, and of course, Scorsese and De Niro. I was very curious when he was here, and I asked Bob, what happens when you and Marty work together? I'll ask you.
I find what's so great about actors, they're like, they receive so much, and they have, it's almost like being, and particularly my relationship to De Niro, I think his it's almost like being an open wound that could feel everything. The sensitivity is so strong. And I just happen to connect with that sensitivity. And there's a great privacy about that.
I'm told the two of you are very private together on the set.
So in any event, he just understood a certain kind of relationship to life that I grew up with, and that had to do with the family.
Did you remind each other of things?
Constantly. Did you notice when he moved that way? I noticed that too. That made he didn't believe us. Yeah. And so there's a kind of immediate understanding that we almost thought the same way.
Do you rehearse your films?
I like to, yeah. I like to rehearse them.
De Niro is well known for his meticulous and sometimes lengthy research. Do you research it before you do a film? Do you do a lot of preparation apart from the storyboards?
Yes, yes.
It's well known that Marty brings to every film a cinematic scholarship that may be unmatched among film directors. How much do you use your clearly encyclopedic knowledge of movies and performances and directors and stuff?
Oh, very much so, very much so. On Taxi Driver, Michael Chapman, I could say, Michael, Godard, 2 or 3 things I know about her. Remember the light, the colors? Oh, yeah, the yellow and the, yeah, okay. And it was a shorthand that way. There's one shot I just keep doing and doing and doing. It's a shot from Marnie. It's even in Gangs of New York. It's when her horse gets hurt and she has to go shoot the horse. And there's a shot of the gun, her hand in the gun, and it's shot from here. That's her hand with the gun, and the shot from here, and she's running. But she's smooth. Obviously, she's not really running. Her hand is moving, it's almost in slow motion, and the grass is going this way. And often, if the filmmakers don't, or the people with me don't know, I get the piece and I show it to them. I do that a lot.
Your relationship with music is unique, I think. The film's titles are superimposed over a slow-mo of De Niro warming up in a mysterious kind of foggy ring.
Right.
Accompanied by one of the most haunting melodies in the operatic canon. Do you remember? What did you use?
Intermezzo by Mascagni. My uncles gave me that, my mother's brothers. They gave me all that music.
From Cavalleria
Rusticana, which has to do with Sicilian jealousy.
Who was your cinematographer on that film?
Michael Chapman.
Yeah. How do you work with your DP? When does he enter the picture?
As early as possible. I've been really lucky. Michael Chapman, Kent Wakeford on Mean Streets and Alice, Michael Ballhaus, over about 5 films now.
Yeah.
They understand sometimes when I do this editing pattern or series of shots which are edited into a montage effect or tracking or whatever, they understand exactly, they understood exactly how to get that. And they understood exactly the meaning of it that I was looking for. Or if I had a problem with it, they try to help me with that.
Do you rely on them to set up the shot, or do you ask?
No, the shot is usually designed.
It's designed. You've got your storyboard.
Yeah. Ballhaus actually transfers those notes into his own book, and then in the morning, one day, I'm arriving, I'm depressed, and he goes, don't be depressed. Today we do the shot that begins on the glasses and goes around. Oh, great, okay.
And you feel good.
Yeah, and you feel good. Okay.
Who was your editor on Raging Bull?
On Raging Bull, I got Thelma Schoonmaker to edit the film, and we've been editing every film since then.
Are you in the editing room with the editor?
Yes.
Every minute?
Every minute.
And what do you edit on?
A Lightwork computer. Yeah. That's since Casino. We've been doing it with Casino. It's faster. We used to work on the Chem flatbed.
Yeah, that was film.
Yeah, on film.
So you no longer use film?
No.
At the end of Raging Bull, this is what we see on the screen. So for the second time, the Pharisees summoned the man who had been blind and so forth. And the man replied, all I know is this, once I was blind and now I can see. John 9:24-26. What's it telling us, Marty?
Well, during the post-production, Haig Manoogian died. And in a sense, everything that he didn't necessarily agree with the films I made, didn't like some things, but everything that I kind of learned from him, or at least was inspired from him, was put into the film. And it's about making judgment on other people, judging other people and saying that person is a bad person. They did this, they did this, they did this. How do we know if we're not in that person's place, we wouldn't do the same?
Yeah.
That's all. Because I had a lot of people say about me over the years, and it's fine. The reality is, it's what I did. I can't run away from it. It's who I am. That's all. And what I am is up there on the screen.
One of the most illuminating subjects in this series involves the criteria by which our guests choose their projects. What makes you say, this is something I have to do?
And character.
Character.
Yeah. The character and the situation the character's in. When you have a character that's pretty strong and is conflicted and hopefully obsessive, maybe a little paranoid, you can get into a very interesting thing, because you can get the script, you see, and you can work it in this world.
The color of money was one of your most successful films.
Yes.
What drew you to this picture?
Well, the possibility of working with Paul Newman.
Paul was the president of the Actors Studio. He was one of the creators of this drama school. And his portrayal of the mature Fast Eddie earned him his first acting Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, what's it like to direct Paul Newman when he's at the peak of his powers as he was in that movie, and he has been ever since?
Paul was... I've never really directed theater. And, of course, Paul knows theater so well.
Yes.
Incredible. And so he taught me how to rehearse in a theatrical way. And that is actually get a hall and lay out... I mean, this may sound very elementary to a lot of people. I usually go to location and rehearse or,
sure.
And other things. But to actually lay out and have a chair and have a tape, so this is a chair, this is this, and actually work out the scenes and work out the rhythm and, if necessary, rewrites right there. We had the whole picture rehearsed within 2 or 3 weeks. And it was the only picture I did, but came in under budget, $1 million, and on 1 day under schedule.
I know that you began working on The Last Temptation of Christ in 1977. It's a very long
Yes.
gestation.
Yeah.
This film hinged on a thorny, no pun intended, question that was settled to the church's satisfaction by the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD, when they decided that Jesus was fully human and fully divine, and that he was one person.
Well, it's the Kazantzakis
Yes.
book. And
Yes, of course.
He understanding that if he's fully divine and fully human, his take on it was interesting in that he learns that he is Jesus, that he is fully divine. He learns by the end of the picture, and he has to suffer. Only at the very, very end. And he has to suffer, like, as we all do in life, for many different degrees, and go through all the same things we do. It's with kids saying, well, if God is God and he dies on the cross, and he's God, he knows he's going to live, so why is he suffering? He doesn't have anything to suffer. He doesn't understand us. Well, that's not the case. This one suffers from the very beginning and fights against it.
This is what Willem Dafoe said when he was in that chair about the experience of working on this film with Marty Scorsese.
I think he knew this movie. He had shot this movie in his head. I mean, he knew the shots. I can't tell you how low budget it was as far as timing. There was no fat on this. You'd put your stuff on, and then you'd go and shoot, 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 shoot. But he was ultimately the greatest actor's director in that he gave me such a beautiful setup and framed me so beautifully and gave me everything to work with that I could not do any wrong.
I had designed all the shots back in '83, most of them, while I was waiting for, to get a smaller budget and that sort of thing, and then finally it was canceled, around Christmas time for the second time. But I had designed it all. Harvey was involved with it from the very beginning. We had cast most of it in '83, and basically we had even scouted Morocco and Tunisia.
Where'd you wind up?
In Morocco.
When the guardian angel vanishes in fire, Jesus returns to the cross and says, it's been accomplished. It's clear that the past 20 minutes depicting Jesus' marriage, his children, has been a hallucination,
right.
A last temptation by Satan. Now that seems crystal clear. Given that narrative clarity, were you surprised by the religious condemnation that the movie evoked?
Yes, I was, actually. I was very surprised. I know the College of Cardinals in Rome condemned it, but the Pope never got to see it. So it was a very interesting situation because, in a funny way, we never really even finished the film. We just had to get it out in the street. It had to do with faith, and it had to do with a rethinking of a religious relationship to, in my mind at the time, to God and our society. And that's what I wanted to do. So therefore, don't worry about that if it's maybe too long at this point. Just get it out there. Let them see that this is what is on the screen, not what's in some old script that's circulating in the streets or in somebody else's mind.
In 1990, you gave us another stunning and seminal film. It was called Goodfellas. What made you decide it was your turn to enter what had been hallowed cinematic ground? This is ground that had been covered, and you entered it and did it brilliantly and succeeded, but it must have taken a moment of thought.
Well, it did. I think, naturally, I had entered it my own way in Mean Streets, and later on there are aspects of Raging Bull.
Yes.
Aspects of it, but not
Yes,
really, not entirely. And so I was not... I read a review of the book, actually, Nick Pileggi's book, and I thought it was wonderful because of the idea of the person, Henry Hill, being kind of a guide, like Virgil and Dante, taking you through all the different levels of organized crime at that time. In a way, it's almost like kids in the standing on a street corner, some tough kids telling you a story, where I grew up, which then leads sort of to stand-up, in a way, and telling a story, but directly. And I decided to use voiceover like wall-to-wall. We designed the picture very clearly, very simply. Everything was there, even the freeze frames, the camera moves, everything on the page.
It's very evident tonight, obviously, that we are in the presence of a gentleman, a gentle man. You have never shied away from the moments of violence in your films. How do you feel about graphic violence in your own films and the films of others and in life?
I think the violence I had in my films, Mean Streets, and certainly in Taxi Driver, and it was an emotional violence that I picked up on when I was growing up. And there was violence where I was growing up as part of everyday life. Violence is a very real and being part of being human. And the society, the place I came from, the way I saw it anyway, violence was certainly an option all the time. But I try to do it, I try not to make it, I don't know how to make it glamorous. So I just try to do it honestly.
Violence, no, Goodfellas is a visual tone poem. I think it's perhaps the most beautiful of all your films. Who was your art director?
Christy Zia.
And how do you work with your art director? How soon does that begin?
We did a lot of work on a lot of old family photographs of mine. My brother, my family, all of that sort of thing. And we took it down to certain places, the Lower East Side.
This is a very beautiful film. In Raging Bull, the title was Crimson.
Right.
In several of your films, including Goodfellas, the title is Crimson. You seem to have a special affection for red on the screen. Am I wrong?
I like it very much. I think it has to do, quite honestly, well, the use of red by certain filmmakers like Powell Pressburger and The Red Shoes, for example, extraordinary. And I saw it at the age of 10. Stayed with me and burned it to my consciousness in a way.
There is a shot in this film that nobody will ever forget, of course, and that's the tracking shot
On the Copacabana.
into the Copacabana. Yeah. How long does that shot last? Do you remember? It is an unbroken shot, huh?
6 minutes.
6 minutes.
The idea was that the camera move has to be in one move because it's the height of his life, in a way. It's the height of his lifestyle.
And he's impressing the girl.
Yes, he's impressing her, yeah.
And he's free and unfettered for 6 minutes. He moves through the kitchen and into the club, and there's Henny Youngman.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, well, the thing about it is that it's the idea of the shot. It's the philosophy of what's happening. What we're winding up now, and I have to be very careful. I keep thinking, well, I could design the shot, but why is it moving? Why is the shot moving now? It doesn't have to move. And because we have lighter cameras and we have all the stuff with digital, why are we doing it? It has no meaning. And I got to hold back now. Right. It's very interesting.
Once again, you cast your family.
Oh,
what did your mother play?
She played Joe Pesci's mother.
What a scene.
Yeah. Improvised, totally improvised. So we put 2 cameras down and they just hung on, you know.
Did your father also play a part?
Yeah, he was a fellow with the cane. He's always been, actually, is one of the fellows who rubs out Joe Pesci.
This is another of your pictures that is cut to music.
Yes.
Cut to
all
one song
music,
after pop oldies. And do you pick the songs? Or
yes.
You do?
Always, all the time, yeah.
Stanislavski said music is the only direct way to the human heart. What are you trying to achieve with the scores of your movies? Is it to evoke something in us?
I think for me, music was one of the first experiences, artistic experiences of appreciation that I had, listening to those old 78s, from Django Reinhardt to the swing music, and then later to hearing Hank Williams, and that sort of thing. So I imagined so much from listening to music. Nothing that any film could create. My imagination just soared and meant so much to me. A certain rhythm, a certain beat, a certain use of an instrument, or particularly a line of a lyric or two. And so also I feel that certain pieces of music reflect the world at that time. And there's sometimes a piece of music comes on, it brings back this Proustian instantly. Yeah. I said, that's what I want to create.
Cape Fear marked your 7th collaboration with Robert De Niro. Bernard Herrmann's music again, even
Yes.
though he was dead.
Yeah. Great. Elmer Bernstein took it.
Yeah, and used it.
And used it up, yeah.
The last 15 minutes of the film are very intense, to say the least.
That was a sequence I wanted to do. But Spielberg and, well, actually, De Niro wanted me to do the film again. He just wanted to play Max. He said, I got to be Max. Spielberg was really wanted me to direct it. And I really tried to do an action sequence and more of a commercial action sequence to see if I, first of all, would enjoy the process, which when I'm shooting I never enjoy it, but actually when I look back I did enjoy it. And I drew every shot, basically, and then gave it to a storyboard artist, and we drew it. There were 200 shots there. And it took, we were in a tent. We were in some sort of a pit. We made all this water and tip tanks, and the great Freddie Francis on camera, who did Elephant Man and all the extraordinary films of David Lynch, a lot of them. And it took about, I don't know, 6, 7 weeks. It was slow moving because of the water.
In The Age of Innocence, you directed an actress who has intrigued me for years. I have sometimes said that I suspect that her astonishing, perfect beauty may have obscured for some her exceptional acting talent. And that, of course, is Michelle Pfeiffer. I'd like to know what it was like to work with her.
Well, Michelle is, I had seen her in a number of pictures, particularly Married to the Mob, and I thought she was so good because I had a kind of a snobbery about sort of films made by Italian Americans that are not Italian American, et cetera, but like I could swear that she was right from who she was playing in that film. And I said, and at the end, the credits came up, and I said, it's Michelle Pfeiffer, I can't believe that's interesting. And I was really taken by that. So over the years, I watched her, and I was the only one that was in my mind that could play that part of Ellen. I was the only one.
She's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's just extraordinary.
Another of the themes in your film, I realized in this one finally, is food.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing pleases me more when I'm sitting in a movie than a wonderful shot of a delicious dish being prepared. I remember Paulie making the dinner
important.
in prison.
The garlic, cutting the garlic.
Cutting the onions. You use food all the time.
Well, I think what it is that I'm also a history buff and a anthropology buff, so to speak. I really feel that what's interesting to me in Age of Innocence is the tribal aspect, that they behave a certain way, that in the upper classes, it's less you say, it's somber colors, you eat a certain way, you don't have dinner to eat and to fill yourself. It's a social obligation. Mm-hmm. And all of this, but without all that, they're still human, they have the same desires. It goes back to even the extraordinary historical film that Rossellini did, The Rise of Power of Louis XIV, which ends on the food, remember?
Hey, Charlie Chaplin ate his shoes.
Oh, yeah, that's the classic with the spaghetti for the straps, yeah. But food is, for me, it has to do with the anthropology of it.
To whom is The Age of Innocence dedicated, Marty?
Oh, to my father when he died, finally. And yeah, he saw the last film he saw of ours was that and Rough Cut. And he was very moved by it, walked out, said it's a very truthful film.
With Casino, you returned...
Oh, thank you. Okay, guys. Thanks.
Who wrote it?
Nick Pileggi.
He also wrote Goodfellas, and you wrote with him.
Yes.
For our writers and our directors out here, when you're writing, how do you work with your collaborator?
It's a little different with each one. In the case of Goodfellas, Nick and I, we worked very closely together each day, 8 pages a day, let's say. We would work 7 or 8 pages or whatever.
Do you write things down in longhand?
Yes, longhand for me. Everybody else works on computers. I can't understand what they're doing. So in the case of Nick Pileggi...
That's because he's technically so deficient. Right?
Oh, I mean, I can't deal with those things.
When Sharon Stone was here, she talked about, of course, she got nominated for an Oscar for her performance, and she won the Golden Globe.
Golden Globe, yeah.
Best performance for an actress. I thought she was superb.
Yeah, me too.
She told us that when you were preparing her for the film, you gave her several films to look at in preparation for the role.
Yeah.
Valley of the Dolls, A Woman's Vengeance, starring Jessica Tandy.
Based on the Gioconda Smile, Aldous Huxley.
And The Passion of Joan of Arc of Carl Dreyer.
Carl Dreyer's Joan of Arc, Falconetti's face. That's it.
In frame it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Who are the directors who have most influenced you, Marty?
And Cassavetes and Wells, definitely. 2 sides of expressing themselves on camera. I loved a lot of John Ford films. Powell Pressburger, no doubt. Pasolini, Fellini, Rossellini a lot. The key ones I keep going. Kazan was the main one, I would think, in terms of learning about acting. I never went to an acting school or took any acting lessons or I don't know how I deal with actors, but
They keep winning Oscars.
yeah, all I know is that when I saw, I was 12 years old and 13 years old when I saw On the Waterfront in East of Eden.
Yeah.
And those were the changes. Those were the changes.
Were you drawn to Kundun by its religious theme, its political theme, or both?
Both, in a way, I think. I think the world we're in now, especially in our society in America, we need input from other cultures, other religions, other way of thinking.
To whom is this film dedicated?
Oh, that was to my mother. Yeah, she passed away right after that.
Is it accurate to say that, in a sense, what we're witnessing over the years is your autobiography in film?
It's accurate. I mean, I don't know if I'm happy with that. I mean, I just don't see any other way of going about it. Meaning that I don't know if that's a good thing. One's ego has to be dealt with when you make pictures, in a way. And each one is somewhat different. And if you put yourself too much in the foreground, you could destroy the film, what you're trying to say. So you have to be subject to what you're trying to express.
Yes, but many directors are more external to the process than you are. You seem to be deeply involved in it emotionally, psychologically, and thematically.
Well, I think that's what's developed over the years, particularly when I finally realized I could make that Raging Bull film. And that's where there was kind of a sadness. I said, well, then I don't know if I could really go off and do studio films, in a way. And so I had to make a choice. And I think a lot of that came from my exposure to Italian cinema and how it affected my family at the time.
When we met at the closing night of the Cannes Film Festival, you had shown 20 minutes of Gangs of New York. What is the genesis of this?
When I was doing Bringing Out the Dead, Mike Ovitz came to visit me and said, what would you really like to do again, the way he asked me with Last Temptation of Christ. And he said, what about that Gangs of New York you always wanted to do? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm forming a new company. Leonardo DiCaprio's in it. How about if we work it out? And so we did. And Joe Roth was involved at Disney, and ultimately Harvey Weinstein.
And who is in the film?
In the film is Leonardo DiCaprio playing Amsterdam, who's a young Irish-American immigrant. Cameron Diaz as Jenny, who's a young pickpocket in that area. And Daniel Day-Lewis as Bill the Butcher, based on a real man named Bill the Butcher.
It occurred to me that the question of class, whether it's class on the Lower East Side or class in New York City in the 1870s, is a matter of enormous interest and importance to you.
Yes, it is, and even in Gangs of New York.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because ultimately in Gangs of New York, you're dealing with the 5 Points downtown, and you're dealing with 20 to 30 to 40,000 people crammed into that area, just got off the boats from Ireland.
Yeah.
There are Anglos there, and there are African Americans and freed slaves. Everybody's different religions are living sort of like the Wild West, only claustrophobic. There were no wide open spaces, and everybody's on top of each other. And there was class distinction there too, very much so. And so to the point that when the draft riots broke out in 1863, the first people that were attacked and killed were the Africans.
How is this film scored?
It's very important, the score in this picture, because there's a traditional score at times, but what happens is that we have music, English, Irish, Scottish folk music, that's blended ultimately with African rhythm. And African music is constant throughout. And it becomes, of course, American music. We did a lot of Russian montage in the 1920s. And just gave it to the second unit directors, drew shots, and said, give me that. And Vic Armstrong he does James Bond films, and he understood the different speeds of the camera. He said, well, if you want that to happen, I can do that at 48 or 36 or 120. And it was fantastic. And I said, but it has to go from here to here, and it's got to cut to this. And just these little bits and pieces, putting together montage. The 19th century in America was probably the most violent century in our history. The Civil War and the riots in the streets of Boston and Philadelphia and New York. And so a lot of this was, this action with the gangs was politically motivated and racist, very racist, very racist. And literally, the Irish were considered anathema to these people. And it has to do with fathers and sons and the birth of a city.
We begin our classroom session with the questionnaire by the great Bernard Pivot. who is the best person who ever did a job like the one that I try to do, I would like to ask you, in the spirit of Marcel Proust, what is your favorite word?
Well, I don't want to sound optimistic or anything, but I loved using the word wonderful. It has a kind of energy to it that means many different things to me and focuses right away and kind of spurs me on.
What is your least favorite word?
I was going to say time, but time is good. Slow. I like faster.
What turns you on?
A number of things, I guess, but the first thing is the enthusiasm of relating with another person.
What turns you off?
Well, negativity. And I complain all the time. It's part of it. But then the complaint, the interesting thing is you have to get to the complaint. The complaint has to become absurd. And then you realize how absurd we all are and what we're doing. Like, what are we doing here anyway? I mean, in terms of being alive. So start with that absurdity. Now you move, and you understand, now suddenly we're in a room, we've got to come up with a scene. Okay, now that's, and it's the negativity. Oh, we can't do that because, oh, we can't, in that case, well, in that case, let's not get out of bed.
Right. What sound or noise do you love?
Well, we have a 3-year-old now, and I like hearing her laugh and talk. I know it may sound corny to you guys, but it's amazing. Children.
Yeah. What sound or noise do you hate?
God, it was interesting. Living downtown Elizabeth Street, the streets were so noisy, and I don't know how we slept, but like we were down there, like all the different traffic and things. Now it's I need a lot of quiet, but it's the very thing that gives you a kind of energy of the city that makes me love it and hate it and want to be nowhere else. I feel I've lived in other cities. This is the only place for me.
What's your favorite curse word?
Oh, I can't. I feel too guilty. I'm too Catholic. I can't say it.
Really?
Yeah, it's terrible. Oh, yeah. I think Joe Pesci could express it better. Mean Streets. When Mean Streets was shown at New York Film Festival, it was the first movie to use that way, right? Like this. And not that, I guess, an Esquire dubious achievement kind of thing, but Joe Pesci's use of it is very interesting, and how he is able to make it like music and break up syllables with it. You know, it's very interesting.
What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Oh, it was music. Would have to be music.
Yeah. Do you play an instrument?
No, never did. Can't read music.
What profession would you not like to undertake?
Well, certainly one thing, not a studio head. That's for sure.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, it's an interesting one. I think the trick is, I think God will be easier on me than I'm on myself. So maybe say, it's okay, come on in. Maybe. You know, maybe.
Here are your students. Come on in.
All right, kids.
Good evening. My name is Cosmin Kivu. I'm third-year director. You told us tonight about what inspired you and your work for the past 30 years or more. My question is, what inspires you today, and how is that different from the past?
There are some films from different countries that I like to watch. I mean, some of the younger filmmakers, new filmmakers. I was the president of the jury of the student films at Cannes this year, and to see the film, the prize winner, I think, was from Brazil. To see these films from all over the world was quite something, and see the point of view of the camera and how the people are relating and trying to tell stories. Usually, if you're shooting a film, too, and you only have a little bit of time on the weekend, you want to look at either, I like all kinds of films, so I'll maybe look at a horror film to just wake up. Just a little appetizer. Some Italian horror film, or, and then go back to something from 1960, 1950. But I watch a lot of foreign films as much as possible. Some French, a few Italian. A lot of the new Italian films don't get here. But when I find that I have to go back to some source, I go back to the old films that I loved, or a piece of music, or reading.
Good evening, Mr. Scorsese. My name is Wayne Asbury. I'm a first-year actor. My question is concerning character development. How much time before filming starts do you devote to one-on-one character development rehearsal type setting, as you explained perhaps with Paul Newman, and could you talk about that process?
Well, I think it varies with each film, and I think in Mean Streets was something that came out of my own life and my father and his brother and a number of other people. And so that was very clear. I mean, once the actors were involved, they knew from the page what was happening, and also from my discussions. In the case of Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, we had a wonderful, very good script by Robert Getchell, and we improvised certain scenes. But that was really working with Ellen Burstyn very carefully and closely, several months before shooting started. Taxi Driver is Paul Schrader. Well, Schrader went through what he went through, and that's what came out. And that was it. There was hardly any change. I mean, there's some improvs. But there's nothing you could say or do. You just look at each other. The actor understands it. You can't... today, there's the danger dealing with Hollywood or the studios is this danger of development. Well, I came out of the 70s where there was no such thing, where you had a script, you may argue, make some changes, whatever, but basically they were backing that particular project. And if you got an actor, the actor was pretty much tied on to the project and went with what they was already there on the page, you know. In the case of New York, I improvised to the point of actually changing the story so much that I couldn't shoot for like a week. We just ran out. I think what I learned was the control of the improvisation, the control that it goes from, starts here, goes from here, goes around there somewhere. Could come back here, but should be, got to get from there to there, the next scene.
My name is Nelly Olmedo, and what qualities must an actor have to make you want to work with her or him?
A simplicity, maybe, and a sense of humor. But the simplicity has to be the kind of honesty that comes out of the actor, I think. You know? And it's funny, it's like, as I say, I never did acting classes, but I don't want to see acting. You know? Because I'm really a film person, in a way. Cinema, you could talk to persons like this, and you get this great... On the stage, you've got to project. It's a whole other thing. But I find that just a simplicity, I think, in an actor, because the camera picks up so much. And with a great sense of humor. That's for me.
Good evening, Mr. Scorsese. My name is Patty Solner. I'm a third-year director. Can you share any secrets about how you communicate with actors to get such astounding performances out of them?
It's an interesting thing. What cinema is, or movies, you don't have to... doesn't necessarily to move the camera. The human face, the story being told by a person in the frame is the key thing, just completely. And if it isn't there, for me, it doesn't work. There was a reassessment of that with Rossellini's films when I did Raging Bull. Not the fight scenes, but all the other scenes were based on a kind of, I think, simplicity. I look back now, I don't know if I see it now, I think it's simple, but I was thinking that way. There's no doubt about a formal simplicity, which I'd love to achieve. And I know to trust the actor in the frame, trust the person in the frame. They'll go with it if they're really into it, you know. I've been very lucky with the actors. The only acting I know is I saw the Kazan movies, but I didn't see them. I lived with them. I kept going from theater to theater. There were no videos at the time, right? So it was playing at another theater. I'd go see it. I'd see it again. And Waterfront, East of Eden, I must have seen 10 times or so in all the different theaters. It was widescreen in color. It was James Dean. It was really the relationship with the brothers and the father that interested me. And I think in my other movies later on, you see that. It's particularly Raging Bull or Mean Streets. Even in Goodfellas to a certain extent, in Casino. It's all there. And I think I was at a certain age, 12 and 13 and 14, when I saw James Dean or on a big screen in color, with stereophonic sound. It was devastating in East of Eden. He spoke for you. He spoke for you. And I wanted to achieve something like that because there was a kind of truth there. Different from the Italian cinema in another way. But there was a kind of truth in the acting that I had never quite experienced before in a theater, in a cinema. And so everything I did was gauged according to Kazan's films. I never saw his plays, to Waterfront and East of Eden, facing the crowd to a certain extent. The way he incorporated what we could term now the documentary in those pictures. He kind of discovered what to do with a camera, like in Panic in the Streets, this film about the bubonic plague, a breakout of bubonic plague in New Orleans with Richard Widmark and Paul Douglas. Watch that one. That's on 20th Century Fox. Jack Palance Zero Mostel. It's quite extraordinary. He shot on real locations, and you can't tell who's a person from the place and who's the actor. And he was suddenly discovering what he could do away from the stage onto film. Wild River, Montgomery Clift, Lee Remick, and all the others in there. You'd see people in the frame that obviously are right from that place that they're making the film. And mixture of documentary, in a way, and hysterical drama, a kind of hysteria that was the life that I was around. I'm sorry. I mean, other people, oh, it's too much, overdone. For me, that was life. That was normal. What they were doing in that film was normal. I saw it every day. Experienced it. I gauged it to that. I gauged it to, how I felt when I saw performances in those films and when I saw it in front of me with the camera. I saw that because I've always wanted to have. Imagine if I made a film that has a scene as extraordinary as that just between Brando and Steiger in the back of the car. There are some moments, and it only comes through. I don't know what it is. It's a process, but the actor is the vessel. It comes through the actor. You know, and I've always, when I've been in doubt, I always went that way. And the one to free it even more and open it up another way was Cassavetes. So I had no real gauge dealing with actors. I've had actors, actually, you know what it is? I've had actors, lucky enough to have actors who felt the same way, and usually about the same films, the same influences. And we didn't say, well, let's do like this movie, but we both felt we were going for something. And they weren't, a number of the actors, too, I was very lucky. They weren't afraid of looking ugly. They weren't afraid of playing a scene on their back and letting the other actor have it. There was a kind of generosity which made me feel like that's about the final product. It's fantastic, these guys. You know? So I've been very lucky.